with Reconstruction, the birth of us coming into leadership, becoming elected official, politics, military. Well, we were already in military forces, all the way going back to the Revolutionary War. But we started becoming more so involved in also building ourselves. That meant cities, towns, and so forth. Education system, HBCUs, different schools. So we started as Black Americans, when Reconstruction started happening, started forming more so to be a part of America, but to also blaze our own trail too. Then we started to, as our cities and towns built, we started to also build our economic power too as well. The economic power of Black Americans is one that only one other group in this country can actually match. So you have a group of people, okay, because when you define a nation, here's some things to think about. When you define a nation, it is a large body of people united by a common descent, history, culture, language, inhabiting a particular country or territory. Okay? So that's why I started saying a nation within a nation, because I just gave you the lineage all the way up to the building of Black Americans. As far as our language go, we actually have a language. It's AAVE. That's African American Vernacular English. It is the combination of Yoruba, all the 5 tribes, mixed in with the English dialect that was learned from the many plantations. Okay? We also have flags too that are synonymous and actually connected to Black America. About 5 flags to be exact. Then in addition to that, we do have our cities, even though they've been destroyed. You can look at Black Wall Street and so forth. We still built cities. Actually, another famous city a lot of people don't know about is Central Park, or Seneca Village is what it was called, before they built Central Park on top of it. Of course, we have our national anthem, which caused a stir once again at the Super Bowl when it was sing, and that's lift every voice and sing. So we have made strides to become like an operating nation. Nielsen's research shows that Black consumers, us as a people, are considered the tastemakers when it comes to setting the tone for mainstream brand choices. Our research, and this is from Nielsen, our research shows that Black consumer choices have a cool factor that has created a halo effect, influencing not just consumers of color, but the mainstream as well. That's what Nielsen said about Black Americans. Okay, we actually have the cool factor. So every trend, when you hear the message, we are the culture, we technically are the culture. Because if it passed the cool test of Black America, it becomes cool. Mm-hmm. Then, when, as you just read in the article, we have, African Americans have 1.4 trillion in spending power. Okay? That 13% population, we have $1.4 trillion spending power. That makes us, annually, we have more money in our spending power than Spain, Mexico, Netherlands, Turkey, or Switzerland. So these are developed countries that this group of people have more of a consumer buying power force than, sitting right here in this nation. So this is why we're going to talk about a nation within a nation and the importance of preserving the formation, the preserving, and how do we keep preserving and making sure Black America history as well as our culture and our contributions are still being recognized. So the first discussion question that we're going to get into, in your social circles, I want you to think about your schools, your church, your family, growing up, and even now. Do you recall Black History Month, Black American contributions being celebrated or acknowledged? If yes, how? Okay, what were the ways that it was done? And if not, what were some of the reasons you believe made people in your social circles not celebrate or acknowledge Black History Month or Black American contributions? So that's the first discussion we're going to have. The floor is open. Let's talk about it.
One place I remember discussion about Black history was in Upward Bound,
Mm-hmm.
because I did go through that program, And that was the first time I actually ever heard of Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, that's something we did every year. We would learn about Carter G. Woodson because I went to Grambling.
Mm-hmm.
And so we learned all of those different things. And then, of course, in the course of being in school, which I went to a rural school district, I really can't remember. I know we probably did celebrate Black History,
Mm-hmm.
but it don't stand out to me in the school. Now, when I taught school, yes, I taught it to preschool. So we did talk about different things and inventions and stuff that we as a people did invent.
Mhm.
So that's pretty much my take.
Okay.
I would say, to the rural, my experience may be a little bit different. I grew up in the rural community as well, but the school that I attended was all-black high school, well, K-12. And so the beauty of all of that is that these African-American Negro culture was embedded within the curriculum. So an example of that would be when we did our literature. We were introduced to all of the great writers, to the great poets, to African-American contributions in history. So to say that it was a Black History Month, every month was a Black History Month because of the content that was taught. So I was telling my husband, I never knew till I got really grown, that was not happening in the other schools, because we had it in our schools all the time, which should be now, I think.
I'm older than a lot of you, and grew up in Mississippi, in Laurel, Mississippi. And we didn't celebrate Black History Month. I'm not even sure how widely it was celebrated at that time anyway. I'm talking about like in the 50s and 60s, but I had the good fortune in the late 60s and the 70s to start running with some people who knew a lot about Black history and showed me how to find more about Black history, or maybe, as I would prefer to say it, the Black contribution to American history. But also, I mean, I certainly don't want to, in saying that, I don't want to mean that I'm not cognizant of and welcoming the whole notion of Black culture and a Black nation. And back in the day, we called it the captured colony.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so that's kind of my perspective.
Okay. Anybody else?
I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
I live a few miles from Black Wall Street. I remember pretty distinctly being like 7 or 8 when there was a really massive shift in the city
Mm-hmm.
to re-emphasizing Black Wall Street and it moving more into the schools and being a part of just not like we were saying, of our continuing part of our curriculum of
Mhm.
celebrating Black history, and not it just being this kind of, oh, there used to be a Black community thriving in Tulsa, was kind of what I heard when I was a younger kid. And then in like later grade school and middle school, my dad was pretty involved in kind of reintegrating Black history into the core curriculum of a lot of the schools and things. But I definitely remember that shift of, I haven't heard these things, or like haven't read these books or things, and like a shift even in our household of like, oh, all of a sudden like the bookcase has a different variety
Right.
of books and biographies and
Right.
things. But yeah, that was my experience in Tulsa.
And then Tulsa.
Yeah.
Oklahoma. This is about the second chance too that I've had somebody that was sitting at the table that was actually close to something that the topic we were talking about when we was discussing it, they actually have a historical connection to the topic at hand. And so that's interesting that you was at ground zero of when they started acknowledging Black Wall Street altogether, because it was that hidden secret. For years of people passed by the landmark, the area, and didn't even know that was sitting right there. And that's and for me, growing up in my household, first, Black History started in my home. You know, I had two parents who grew up in the era where you got the civil rights movement happen, and they're teenagers going into young adults. And so they were ground zero. My mom, when she was attending Southern University, the year that was like her junior year was when two young men were killed on the campus behind it. So she has the commemorative yearbook that goes back to what happened if we all became better. These are things going on. My father entered the military at the time when it was still black men going in uniform was still a dangerous thing. And so Black history being taught was already in my home. Because I attended magnet schools was structured at that time to touch it a little bit, but outside of that, that's about it. You know, hit the highlights. Martin Luther King, you know, Rosa Parks, you know, hit the highlights and keep going. That's how the extent of Black history or Black culture being introduced into the magnet schools. And then from there, but where the explosion starts to really happen again was college for me. College, and then transitioning into working in a career field where I had to really start becoming more cognitive of understanding history, because putting on that uniform and then you're standing in a spot, you know, I had to be aware of what that sheriff badge, the history of that sheriff badge, and how it affects our community. You know, when I'm stepping out the car, when I'm approaching somebody, there's a history behind it, you know, that's tied in. So that was actually my journey. I was lucky and blessed to be surrounded by people who pushed it in the home, and then even when the school wasn't there, it wasn't like I was lost or whatnot and stuff. From being able to know it. Anybody else?
I grew up in two different places. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and Phoenix, Arizona.
Right.
So I got two different perspectives. So Phoenix, Kansas City, to start off, middle school, for Black History Month, we did family trees, but we did them different. We would go to UMKC archive, their basement, and we would give these stubs to this archive lady, and she would then give us a report back in a week of what she found based off of our name and our lineage. And that's how I ended up finding out about my lineage at such a young age, was because of how we did family trees at the start of every Black History Month. And once we got our results, then they would open up the gym, and it would be like a bunch of vendors that are like Black-owned businesses or barbershops or entrepreneur financial development companies and things like that, and they would just encourage us to think outside the scope when we were kids. So that was in Kansas City, but when I moved to Phoenix, Arizona, that's when it changed, because they necessarily celebrate indigenous culture way more during Black History Month.
Right.
So that's what they're bringing out, is like their ancestral, and you're starting to see a lot of cyclones, dust cyclones in the distance, but with our Black history in Phoenix, it was just, they would do highlights. They wouldn't really go into depth, and unless you go to like an art gallery or something.
Right.
And we would have a blackout, which is like a Black Friday, and you just like for, I think it's like 4 or 5 blocks, they would block it off like a block party, and all of the Black creators, small business owners, everything that you can think of are lined up with tables. So, but as an adult, it's just like, I don't think people know too much about like the history that goes into where we come from. They just know about the highlights, because even with my family, I'm Creole and Haitian.
Mhm.
So I have an aunt that passed away at 103.
Mhm.
My great grandmother passed away at 113.
Mhm.
So with that being said, they had that very large wicker chair in their living room, and there was two that was sitting next side by side to each other.
Mhm.
And it's just, that's where I learned how to wrap my head and how I learned how to wash my feet after grounding myself and things like that. So it's like growing up with the Southern education and the country education of Black history in general, from Missouri to Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, because that's where all my family is,
Mhm.
all in my household.
Yeah.
So I learned more from Black history in my house than I did in the school.
Mhm.
Making any sort of big deal about Black History Month.
Mhm. It's exposure, baby.
Yeah. So,
Nothing.
I
Exposure.
mean, even like in 2016, like I went to Parkway High School, and
Mhm.
every election year they do a mock election. So the mock election in 2016, I was a senior, and it was very not fun. It was very much not fun.
Mhm.
I'm sure you can imagine how that went.
Mhm.
And so I think I just got to the point where I was like, if I am gonna learn about Black history, like it's up to me.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at with it. Yeah. Yeah, it is unfortunate. I can't really recall any. I mean, maybe there was something I don't remember, but I think it was like you guys said, like MLK
wasn't.
Jr. and Rosa Parks and stuff.
It wasn't.
Yeah. Hit the highlights.
The highlights,
Mhm.
if even that, maybe, you know.
Begrudging to the teeth.
Mhm.
So,
Or somebody put something, throw it together, and then everybody's
picture
sitting there,
up
and
and
it's
go.
just offensive all the way around. Mhm.
And there was a vibrant Black community that I didn't know anything about.
Mhm.
And Oak Park High School in Laurel, Leontine Price came out of that,
Right.
and other, I can, for some reason, drawing a blank on the name of the athlete, but he's an Olympic champion. We, on the white side of town, we won the state championship one time.
Mhm.
On the black side of town, they won 4 years in a row and never lost a game.
Right.
Right. And I didn't know any of that. I'm sure it was there, but I mean, you know, probably in the paper, and I just was too young to read, or, you know, wasn't paying that much attention being a teenager.
Mhm.
The second thing is, just to stick this in here so people will know about this, on Friday, and of course now I'm drawing a blank on his name, the journalist from the New York Times came and spoke at the
Charles Blow.
uh,
Charles Blow.
Charles Blow came and spoke, and as it happened, I had run across his video, which is on probably Netflix or Prime or whatever, and it's called South to Black Power.
Yes.
And it's talking about the return of people to the South, African Americans in particular to the South. If you could shift the population in Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina to the populations that were there prior, at the very end of the Civil War, you would have Black majority states.
Yep.
And South Carolina is like 60%, and Mississippi and Louisiana are like 52, 55, something like that.
Yep.
And it was only after the Great Migration that dropped off.
Yes.
And what he's trying to encourage is a migration in the other direction. And I just think that's really important. And that his is different from like the Republic of New Africa, which is kind of what I grew up learning from, because the Republic of New Africa's capital was in Jackson, Mississippi.
Right.
And but it was basically wanted to separate off, which made perfect sense to me. Of course, I grew up in the Confederacy, so to speak. So I mean, separating off from the United States was not automatically freaky. And but I think his proposal has a lot more opportunity, or a lot more chance of succeeding, because all of it is basically taking legal steps. I just wanted to bring that in. Y'all can
Glad
do
you
whatever
did.
you want to with that.
No, we're glad you did.
Yeah, we're glad you did,
I have a
because it
question,
definitely.
Dr. Pierre, may I ask?
Yeah.
I have a question regarding secession. And my question is, so hypothetically, if the state of Louisiana decided to secede from the United States and that was granted, what would happen to all of the services that the states have?
Governmental services.
I mean, all of them. I'm talking about utilities, the social services, the social security, all of the things that they are afforded now. When you succeed, do they go with you?
Nope.
Are you abdicating of that? Is that?
No, that's not what I'm advocating.
No, but
No,
I'm
not
asking
you personally.
I'm asking you
Well,
that
if-
question.
You mean from a legal
From
standpoint?
a legal standpoint, yes.
Well, I mean, if you secede, basically you'd be cut off from all federal aid.
Okay, well,
I mean, unless it was given to you as a international,
Okay, but that's what I
yeah,
want
that's-
to know.
that-
I hear that swirling around in different
Right,
conversations,
right.
and I just wanted to hear
But
that from a legal
part of the
perspective.
advantage of Blow's approach is that part of it's not gonna happen.
Right.
If he's successful.
And it opens up line, because I actually got a chance, I follow a lot of Charles Blow work, and everything, and I got to get ready to get his book too. But in that approach, it's more or less like, and I know you're gonna touch on this in a little bit later, okay, do the transatlantic slave trade. You have a situation where you have a group of people who tilled and toiled a land. If you go back to those tribes that I just talked about that we come out of, one of the most common cultural practice is about the toiling of the land. Okay, if my blood touches this land, if my hands touches this soil and everything, this becomes a part of me. And so coming back to the South is returning back to the area that the ancestors told, touched, sowed, bled in, died in, and are in the ground and so forth, and it's like retracting on it. And so it does make more sense, because it's like you will look at it like part of an inheritance, which is why, the conversation, whether you talk about, when you especially talk about Black Americans, and that's why I definitely wanted to show the dollar amount value. Okay, our consumer power is 1.4 trillion. Who's gonna take it away?
Thank you, Dr. Pierre. Okay, guys, I'll be real quick. I'm just going to hit on some points, but I do want to share with you early
Where am I
on.
going?
I may strike a few nerves, and so please feel free to do some pushback, because I've always been a rebel. I guess that's what you call being a rebel. And my mother, God rest her soul, growing up in Bossier City, my young sister, is that living through all of this craziness and seeing my great-grandmother, grandmother, etc., many times be afraid, I couldn't understand that from an academic perspective. My aunt taught me to read. I could read before I went to school, and that was supposed to be something special, being a little black boy. You mentioned about being the athletes. So with that stated, we're going to talk about global academics, and if you look in the notes that Dr. Pierre shared with you, we put some things down, and I just wanted to highlight real quickly.
I didn't put that part down. You have to
Okay.
go over with them.
About the oldest African university was in Morocco, known as Al Qaran, and the oldest university itself was in 859. Now, why am I mentioning this? And we talk about Asian. I decided to talk about the Asian and the African universities, along with, obviously, we know Harvard was the first major white university, etc., is because that's what most of the arguments stem from in our America. It's either about the Asians or black people, that kind of thing. And we never talk about the academics. So the academic piece, excuse me, having historical connotations there. One thing I wanted to share too is what the young sister was saying about student athlete. Even to this day, 2024, most people don't even know the origin of that, where it even came from. And so I like schooling people about it because there's no such animal. Student athlete came about because some unfortunate young man and I call white people my less Caucasian, my less melanated brothers and sisters, by the way. Because one less melanated gentleman got hurt. Medical bills were quite expensive. The mom was on the university about paying for the medical bills. They decided they were too extensive. Like people do, they got their attorney. And so it was determined that since he is not an employee, he is a student. thereby we are not obligated to pay his medical expenses. That's where the term student athlete came from. It had nothing to do with academics and athletic ability. So like people do, then somebody grabbed that and ran with it, not even knowing the origin of it, and giving, quote, credit because we were doing what we were supposed to do. I know I was. Bernice didn't play that. You know, you go to school, you sit down, you pay attention, you get your work, etc. Then it was discovered I had a little talent. So then the talent developed. But you get labeled a student athlete when in fact it's an insult and an oxymoron because I'm going to school. It doesn't need to be said I'm a student. If you want to emphasize the fact that I'm an athlete, okay. But the two does not exist. But we in 2020, even as late as 2024, has glamorized it, and I am happy that young men get recognition all the time, but there is no such animal as a student athlete with academic and look it up, guys. and that, so when we talk about learning and when we talk about education, people seem to fail to understand that, and we're talking about Black history, etc. When you are marginalized from the beginning, when you are indoctrinated to think that you're less than, when you are told that you can't learn, or when you watch various clips, and I know I don't have but 7 minutes with the Buffalo Soldiers and the whole nine. I have to tell this story when we talk about education, and people idolize General George Custer, and when General George Custer never showed back up again, he was given specific orders to take members of the Buffalo Soldiers with him to this fight, the 9th and 10th Regiment. He called Buffalo Soldiers brunettes. And it's a matter of fact. You can just look up Custer and Custer's Last Stand. And he told his superiors he didn't need any brunettes. He didn't want any brunettes fighting with him. Now, I'm not intimating that had he taken the brunettes, he would have been spared. Then again, maybe he would have. You have your Red Tail, the Tuskegee Airmen. You have the Harlem Hill Fighters. I mean, you have all of these things that we never talk about in history. So as a young boy, I'm growing up, as you're talking about in Bossier City, sweetheart, with Barstow Air Force Base there, I'm hearing the older men talk about World War I, World War II, and this kind of thing. But they're not getting any respect. I'm looking at individuals that could not recognize their names if they were written on that wall, but they were very intelligent. So as we talk about education, we never dive into why students are not learning, even in modern times. So I jotted down, we put down a few things, and one of the first things I wanted to talk about is we never distinguish curriculum is different from academic standards in that standards define what students are expected to learn in a particular subject and grade, and a curriculum defines how teachers will teach to ensure student standards. So as an old principal, and I'm not patting me on the back, that's why I brought the George McKenna story. As an old principal, I learned from the best. So when I would go in and be a principal, and the Lord blessed me to turn 3 schools around, I would make that very clear to my teachers, and they look at me like a deer in the headlights. Well, we're going to meet with the superintendent, and this is the curriculum, and they say we need to be on page 50 by the second week. Hey, if my kids are not learning, you're not teaching anybody, you're talking to the wall.
Right.
And I would use the word on purpose. I said, you ain't teaching anybody. You're talking to the walls. The kids don't understand it anyway. So you've got to give them some development. Then we would use the learning style inventories. Most people look at me again like I'm crazy. I would fight with my superintendents all the time when I had to hire teachers. I said, okay, if we're talking about hiring teachers in core areas, then I want teachers that can do differentiated instruction, that understand how to use manipulatives and all of those things, if you're going to educate my kids.
Right.
They go, well, but Mr. Lars, it's a shortage. Oh, go find them. Go find them. Then let's give them learning inventory styles, and let's give it to our kids, and then we'll see where the kids are. Then maybe we can slot the kids in with these teachers that have similar learning styles, so your instructional delivery will be different. So you can't say, well, Bobby's just dumb and he can't learn. I don't think that's the case. And that's why I'm saying, now I'm patting myself on the back, that's why I'm encouraging you guys to watch the George McKenna story. Because we did a lot of that. I don't have a movie, and I tell my wife on a selfish note I should have, because we did some of the same things in places people didn't think it was possible. Now, why did I share that? And why did I want to bring out about the student athlete, that type thing? Because I was a big guy, because I was a former free agent with the Houston Oilers and the Raiders, they thought they were hiring, because I always went into these, quote, schools that were supposed to be doomed. So they thought they were hiring, excuse me, but they were trying to hire a police officer, not an academician. But they got both. Because I believe in discipline, and I know what I'm doing. So when I sit my special ed teacher down, and we're talking about an IEP, and there is no parent there, what are you doing? Well, we got a deadline to get this IEP. Where's the parent? So you don't know anything about this kid other than what somebody else told you. You don't know how we're going to instruct, what we're going to do. Where is his learning inventory sheet that I gave you to look at his learning styles? Well, so how are you going to run an IEP? So it's things like that. What we do not grasp as educators, and people get angry with me sometimes, and my wife can tell you, we'll be at school board meetings, and I don't do this public because I don't hurt nobody's feelings. People talk about how nice the principal is. I hope he or she is nice, if they were real right, but do they know how to lead people and get instruction? Do they know how to instruct their teachers? We never brought anything new into the buildings I was blessed to lead without me having people come in and train my teachers. Every faculty meeting, we were training them on delivery, how to work with students, etc. And you know what happened? Students started coming to school, fights went down, all kind of craziness. And people think you have to categorize all this one by one. It's good to do that because it looks good. You go, well, what does your program do? Well, it does 1, and it does 2, and it does 3. Well, they're all married, just like the earlier conversation that we were having about what you learn. And if I can regress and go back a little bit, young lady grew up in Bossier City, having only gone to Airline High School a year and a half, at Charlotte Mitchell, we always had Black history everywhere, pictures everywhere, teachers talk to you about it, etc. At Airline High School, nothing. The first time they had an Airline High School Black history program, I think I was the first speaker to ever do that. I don't think they had another one since then. It happened to be a guy that went to high school with me, who's Jerry Davis, who happened to be assistant principal there. They kept pushing for it, and he asked me to come and speak. So, and that's what I'm sharing. So when you say Bossier City, I grew up there, and my mother's asleep, and I can hear her now. Boy, them people gonna kill you. They just have to kill me, because I ain't having it, And we talk all the time about different things. Louisiana, let's touch that real quick. And a lot of people don't know this because we need to understand. First of all, in an educational institution, you have a nomenclature. And that nomenclature should tell you what that child needs to know from grades 11, K through 12. If it's math, if it's science, if it's English, are they going to be able to identify dangling modifiers? Do they understand the difference between this, that, and the third? By second grade, by third grade, by fourth grade. 99% of your principals never work with their staff like that. 99% of the teachers don't even get it. What do? They sit in the faculty room and they complain about the students not being prepared. Well, he should have learned this in second grade. Well, he didn't. So now we know what it is he's supposed to learn, so we need to use some manipulatives and all these other things to try to get him there. These are the kind of things that we as citizens let go and keep trying to figure out why our kids are not educated. Then we go get on the school board because we've been a teacher for a few years, or we've been a principal or something for a few years, and everybody think everything's going to be fixed. Not happening, because guess what? They have the same mindset. So just in Louisiana, I said I want to touch that. It's on the books. Look it up. Louisiana Department of Education. In Louisiana, all school systems are able to purchase instructional materials that are best for their local communities. Who decides? What's best for the local community? Are your students not global? We have a large Air Force base right there in Bossier City. People go all over the country. I just said I heard the old men in my community talking about World War I and talking about Korea, all that stuff. So then now you're giving me the power just to decide, because I want to stay in the South, and I want to stay in Louisiana, so I get to decide what you're going to learn. The Louisiana Department of Education led an online review of instructional materials listed on the page over here and determined the degree of alignment with student content standards to support school systems with these decisions. Again, you have people making these decisions that have no clue what education actually is. And that's what I said to one of the people about Bessie DeVos. This lady knows nothing about education, but everybody think they can do what we do. Everybody think they can do what teachers do. And they don't have a clue. They think because they can cite words or they may know a few vocabulary words that they can be excellent teachers. Not so. Anybody, I'll be honest with you, anybody can teach me. But what about some of the guys I played ball with who didn't have the academic background? Can you teach him? And 99.9% of the time, the answer was no. And sometimes they were smarter than me. They just weren't academically, but they were smarter than me. So that's why I'm saying what I'm saying as we talk about education. And the one that each local school system should determine if their use is appropriate to meet the educational needs of their students. Now this source is the Louisiana Department of Education. And all of this stuff about, oh, it's too much government, just that. That's insane. So your kid's just gonna stay in, I have a friend in Lars, Mississippi, his name is Larry McGill. And so Larry's just gonna stay in Lars, Mississippi, and I'm just gonna stay in Bossier City. That might be good. But we teach our kids to do what? Grow, educate themselves, spread your wings, become entrepreneurs. How am I going to do that if I'm not prepared as a global learner? So as we talk about education and how the institutions got started and things of that nature and where they are and what the curriculums are, people don't understand that it's not just the curriculum. And you saw it, and I thank Doc for putting that down for me, is that people don't understand. That's two different things. You got to know what we're doing. But how many educators actually know that? People get on, the cameras come, Doc, they put the microphones on these superintendents' faces, and I guarantee you, I can write the script. Well, we have your kids' best interests at heart, and we're going to do everything we can to help your child. And, we support our teachers and that kind of thing. And I'm laughing because I see it all the time. I just said, she can tell you, I just laugh to myself. I got to say, man, these people are buying that. He hadn't said anything. He hadn't said anything about what we're going to do to actually help instruct these children. He hadn't said anything about how we're going to help our teachers be able to progress and move forward. He hadn't said anything about how we're going to make sure the administrators that we choose are prepared. Nothing. But he's a great superintendent. No, he's not. No, he's a politician in a position that's making money and just telling you what he think you want to hear, and the kids are still not getting help. But your kid's going to be okay because you're educated. So you're going to have him or her at a certain level. But the time is out, but I just want to, I think our question is supposed to be, Doc, for that we're supposed to ask, from your perspective, what other institutions have and continue to impact how black history and culture is received and recognized in the United States? And I'll have to start them off with that by why. Having gotten a bachelor's degree from Louisiana Tech University, I can't remember one time that being in the education department that anything was ever emphasized about black history. Not one. Not one. But I was on the national winning football championship team there. We talked about that all the time. But I can't tell you how many times we talked about black history.
As passionate about education as I am, I think every child deserves the right to literacy. I think there's a fundamental issue with the vetting process for teachers. Now these universities are fast-tracking teachers into the classroom, where you can come from a totally different industry and get into an alternative certification program and go straight into the classroom and hold someone's child hostage as far as education is concerned. And I think that if we don't do our due diligence as we are now and go out and do something about it and be as vocal as you are, because I'm just as vocal, then it's not going to stop. Johnny can't read sometimes because his teacher can't read. I teach adults. And that's not something that I'm making up. I'm telling you in actual practical application, I'm telling adults to indent paragraphs to the point where so many are not. I'm having to Google, are paragraphs no longer indented? Because they're doing these things systematically, and they're in the classroom in many low-performing schools with people's children.
Amen.
And that is a problem. That's a problem. The other thing, you mentioned the IEP. Now, I was on a transition team with the Cattle Parish School Board for many years. And as the workforce professional, my job on that transition team was to tell children that were exiting special ed or aging out about other opportunities. I sat in an IEP at a local high school, and the child kept telling this panel of people that's very intimidating, as it is, that his mother was riding the bus and she was on her way. But due to time constraints, that did not matter. They sat there and they talked over that child's head for a good 45 minutes, to where I told the superintendent that I could not answer the questions that they were asking him. They were asking him to project for 5 years and all sorts of intimidating questions. So the IEPs are never correct because they're designed to collect data as opposed to support the student. So it's just real refreshing to hear someone as passionate about education, because children can
Thank you.
read. Children can learn. Even if they have disabilities or challenges, they still can learn and perform at some level. But when they're being taught and handled by people who have a level of discontent with the job, the pay, the school system, their inabilities to teach, because if you have shortcomings, we all know what they are. So we work around those shortcomings, and you're gonna get whatever I have for you, however I can give it to you, even though it's not meeting the curriculum, it's not meeting the expectation, it's not meeting anything close to academic excellence. So when you get someone in a classroom that's attuned to what a child should get because they are equipped to give it, that's when you come out on the other side with the academic excellence that every child deserves. And that is always my biggest discussion. That's what I believe, and I think that we need to just revisit who's going into the classroom.
I agree with that. Dr. Lester,
She had a
I agree with
question.
it.
I was just gonna ask, what is IEP?
Individual,
Okay.
is a plan.
Okay.
So they, over time, I guess, I would just sit in on them. They project what's gonna happen. So these kids were exiting the school.
Okay.
They were either aging out of special ed, like at age 24, 21. Yeah, so they were, in essence, being turned out into the world with no idea what to do.
They can go as long as 26.
May I piggyback on Dr. Lester, please?
Okay.
The data,
They can go as long as 26 now,
we love
unless they
data.
change it.
We love data. But data has a purpose. So, for instance, you mentioned the literacy levels of students. And so there's a lot of data, we look at plethora of data that says if students cannot read by 3rd grade, their likelihood of having a productive life and being a productive citizen is severely decreased. As a matter of fact, it is what we like to call the school to prison pipeline. And I added something that says, in the graveyard, because you're going to become involved in other activities that probably are going to lead you not only down the path to the criminal justice system, but to the graveyard. That's data. And since we have this data, what are we doing with this data besides talking about it?
Right.
You mentioned the interventions, and I agree. Since we're such a brilliant society, you would think that if we can put a man on the moon or a woman on the moon, we should be able to figure out the appropriate interventions to do so that these gaps are closed. But I submit to you that it's intentional. And if I'm wrong, God forgive me. This is intentional. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the people that are benefiting from it are not people that look like us, because we are the consumers of the criminal justice system, prison system. And I say, and I don't have any proof, and we're so disconnected from that, we don't even have an economic voice in the system, since most of the people that are in the prison system are people of color. Do we have any contracts down there to provide whatever services that they need? Do we go to bid? I mean, we're just not connected that way.
We're guests.
We're just guests down
We're
there.
guests.
We just don't have the economic prowess nor the voice
No, we
that's
don't.
heard. And I did my master's thesis on the academic achievement gap, and the numbers are there. But I could not find in any of the literature a reason for the gap, because you would have to say it's based on racial disparity.
Yep.
Clearly.
Mm-hmm.
People do not enjoy being in poverty. People become conditioned to live in poverty because they cannot see their way out.
Mhm.
So you have to live, if we had to stay in this building, as uncomfortable as it is, we would become conditioned to enjoy this environment because that's all we have.
Correct.
So that is why people stay in poverty. People of color mostly, whatever, or whoever falls within those financial guidelines, never get the pleasure of having something that they want. So one would say, well, why don't they save their money? Because everybody enjoys instant gratification. If you want to go get a new car and you can, you do. But if you don't have access to income and don't have the financial literacy and understanding, you're doing what will satisfy you immediately. And that is part of the problem that trickles over into the schools.
Correct.
But there's not anybody that's gonna stand up and be a voice for those children that have parents working 2 and 3 jobs to make it. You can't be in 2 places at
One
once.
time, no.
And I was
And
gonna
I,
add to that.
Yes,
yeah, go ahead and then.
Many parents or people are just trying to survive.
Right,
That's what I'm just saying.
And some degree, people are trying to survive too.
As well.
right.
So, I mean, even with that, they're trying to survive.
Yeah.
That's
You know
what-
what, I was just saying to my husband, we were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When I was in college, I'm like, I don't know why am I taking all this? Oh, now I know. Because as you said, on that pyramid, at the bottom is where most people in poverty are. We are just trying to get our basic needs met, and you never get to self-actualize.
Yeah.
Because you a self-fulfilling prophecy is in effect all the time. And then you have the trauma.
Yeah,
the
trauma.
So you stay traumatized.
Yes.
Stay